Joining the conversation now with us is Deborah James, former Secretary of the Air Force under President Obama. Anna and Betsy are back with us as well. Secretary, really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want you to listen to what CIA Director Mike Pompeo had to say about another missile test potentially by North Korea.
I'm quite confident that he will continue to try to develop his missile program, so it wouldn't surprise me if there was another missile test.
If North Koreans do test another missile, does anything in the U.S. strategy change?
First of all, Hallie, I want to point out the U.S. strategy for many years has been a blend of military strength, exercising and preparing for the possibility of a war, but always focusing on diplomacy and trying to bring this to peaceful ends.
It's the idea of strategic patience.
Strategic patience. They've renamed it, but I would assert there's not a whole lot different other than the tone at the top.
Well, so that's interesting because Secretaries Mattis and Tillerson are out today in the Wall Street Journal with this new op-ed saying we're replacing that failed policy of strategic patience with strategic accountability. You think these are the same things?
I think it is very, very similar, and I would note that over the weekend, the South Korean ambassador, South Korea being our key ally in this case, called it more of a strategic confusion type of an approach. So we have mixed up our allies. We have confused the situation with this bellicose language coming directly from the top.
So are you concerned then about the strategy that you are seeing from this administration, from Secretary Mattis, Tillerson, General Dunford?
I am not concerned about that level. I'm concerned about the tone from the top. And the reason for that...
Explain that, yeah.
The reason for that is because there's more than one war in our history, if you look back in the history of the world, where there has been a trigger because of a miscalculation by one side or another. And we have a lot of bluster going on right now from the top of the two governments involved. And that could be dangerous for a miscalculation.
Is the rhetoric that you're talking about from President Trump, which you point out differentiates from what you're hearing at sort of the next level down from his cabinet, could that be part of a strategy from the United States? There's been a lot of talk about, the madman theory, et cetera. Do you think that's intentional?
It could be. It could also be that our president is one who tends to lead from the gut. He says what he thinks. He has a kind of a strong authoritarian approach, as does Kim Jong-un. So you have two leaders here who are going at each other in ways that could be dangerous because it could cause one to miscalculate.
What do you say to the critics, though, who say, listen, Kim Jong-un is North Korea has clearly increased their capabilities when it comes to its weaponry, even in the time of strategic patience. And they say, hey, it wasn't working. What's the rejoinder to that?
Well, I think we have just had some very recent successes in the UN. 15-0 voting to impose very tougher sanctions.
Under the Trump administration.
Under the Trump administration, that's right. And just today, China, or tomorrow, will be imposing those sanctions. I think we need to make sure now that those are enforced in an airtight way, and let's just double down on diplomacy. I think now is the time to go a little bit more quiet.
Betsy?
An intelligence community source pointed out to me the same thing you're saying about how China's role in enforcing these sanctions is really key here. And that's why the fact that the president is being very bellicose towards China on trade this week is so important. Part of the reason that China might feel motivated to enforce those sanctions is they think it's in their best interest. For them, though, now sanctions enforcement can become a bit of a carrot that they can use in relation to the United States. So that context is really vital because to a significant extent, China pressuring North Korea is the key piece here.
And Secretary, you agree with that assessment?
I do. China can do a lot more, and we will see now whether they really enforce these sanctions in as close to an airtight fashion as possible.
How important is it, Anna, that Secretaries Mattis and Tillerson are on the same page here?
Well, I think you've seen a lot of different arguments coming from different sides of this administration. What does the president saying? What does he actually mean? I think this is a definite strategic show of force to say we are together on this, we are simpatico, and this is where the United States policy really is.
Secretary, to you for the last word. If you had the president's ear right now, President Trump, what would you be telling him to do?
I would tell him to tone down the bluster and the rhetoric from the top and work with these new sanctions that we have both China and Russia on board to enforce and ensure that the enforcement happens in an airtight fashion, double down on diplomacy, and let's tone back the testosterone.
Former Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah James, thank you very much for being here and for your perspective on set. We have a lot more to come up today in the show. In addition to all of this happening overseas, another possible foreign policy crisis. President Trump threatening possible military action in Venezuela. Now, the vice president says the U.S. would much prefer a so-called peaceable solution. So what do either of those options look like? That's next.